I'm not going to spend a lot of time introducing, but this is Michael McLeod, if I'm pronouncing it correctly.
Got it.
And he is from
Grown Out ADHD.
Thank you. I was going to say no grown, but I didn't know it wasn't right. I'm eating too many foods right before. Talking to our children, communicating with our children that may be on a different plane than us as we're communicating with them is something that we struggle with and try to improve on a daily basis. And Mr. McLeod is going to help us with that. So can we welcome Mr. McLeod?
Thank you all so much. My name is Mike McLeod, as said. I'm a speech and language pathologist, ADHD and executive functioning specialist based out of Philadelphia. It is such a privilege to be here. I come to Maryland all the time. I do a lot of work over in Annapolis with the Focus Foundation. This is such a beautiful school, beautiful area. It's a privilege to be here with you all. Thank you all for having me. I'm really, really excited about this. So we have 2 short hours with you guys. This is a lot of information, so I'll try to get through it as quickly as I can and try to jam-pack as much helpful information as possible. But my goal for this presentation is to really misspell and push out a lot of the misconceptions and outdated information about ADHD and executive functions. You know, this term executive functioning has become such a buzzword now in all of education. Really, what is executive functioning? What does it mean? Is it as simple as having a messy backpack or folders that aren't being used and, you know, kids who are externally disorganized and all those things? You know, let's really dig deep to see exactly what ADHD and executive functioning is, go through a lot of the misconceptions, go through the new research, and kind of go into it. We can finish with a nice Q&A at the end and make it really collaborative and hopefully it's very helpful to you all. And I have some papers here that we can pass out and everything, and we'll chat afterwards. So here's a very outdated picture of myself that I should probably update. And that's my daughter Eden. I always like to give her a shout out there. She's 20 months old now, but I love that picture. That's when she first sat up. Okay, so I love to start my presentations with this little quote. It would be nice if you would leave your behavior at school so distracted and absent-minded, and your poor interest in all I teach set a bad example for the whole class. Anyone know who this quote is about? Or who it was said about? Einstein, there you go. Teacher's comment to a young Albert Einstein. Quite fascinating. Things turned out pretty good for him. And I love Benjamin Bloom, the educational philosopher. What any person in the world can learn, almost all persons can learn if provided with appropriate prior and current conditions of learning. Great educational quote. So I love to run through my sources and my resources in the beginning of my presentation because you're going to hear these names a lot. So first, the Grow Now model of internal language. We did a year-long research study on the Grow Now model of executive functioning at the Stratford Friends School in Newtown Square outside of Philadelphia. So we did a really intensive research, positive correlation study to internal language and executive functions there. And these are some of my favorite people. Yeah, go for it. Sure. These are some of my favorite people in the field of executive function. So definitely check them out. You'll hear those names a lot. The first is Sarah Ward, fellow speech and language pathologist. Who here has heard of Sarah Ward? Anybody? So Sarah Ward is amazing. She's an SLP who specializes in ADHD and executive functioning. You can find her at efpractice.com. She's constantly doing webinars and trainings that you can sign up for and learn from her. A lot of her work in this field of executive function has really become a gold standard. So she's done an incredible job creating treatment plannings and different approaches and methods to strengthen executive function. So you can find her at efpractice.com. She's the owner of Cognitive Connections and the 360 thinking model. The worldwide leader on ADHD is Dr. Russell Barkley. Nobody has published more research articles, published more books. You can find him on YouTube. Go to YouTube, type in Dr. Russell Barkley. He has unbelievable lectures that will just blow your mind on ADHD. You'll hear his name a lot today. So there is nobody, he is second to none in the field of ADHD. So check him out, read his books, and check out his resources. The next is a great friend of mine, Ryan Wexelblatt, who is a social worker, also known as the ADHD dude. So him and I are great friends. We have a podcast coming out soon, the two of us. So definitely keep an eye out for that. And he has great videos that are, quick parent coaching techniques. He has a membership site for parents. And he has a lot of YouTube videos for kids with ADHD to learn about their own ADHD and learn about their own difficulties. So he does a great job putting out some incredible content. And in terms of what I said earlier, where there's been such incredible research over the past 5-10 years that really has changed the way we look at ADHD and makes a lot of the old views so outdated, the Harvard Center of the Developing Child really is on the forefront of this research. So definitely check out developingchild.harvard.edu and look at the research that they've done on the frontal lobe and ADHD and executive functions. They're absolutely amazing. So they're doing incredible work right now on brain scan studies, MRI studies, CT studies. It's incredible what they're doing, learning more about the prefrontal lobe and how to strengthen executive functions. And then a lot of people really don't know about CHAD. CHAD is a national nonprofit organization. It's based on the local county. So every county has their own CHAD organization. CHAD stands for Children and Adults with ADD, ADHD. And it's a great organization, free to sign up, where parents of kids with ADHD, if you're an adult with ADHD, sign in, do parent support groups, and different trainings. I'm doing an online webinar tonight for Bucksmont County CHAD from my hotel room, right around the corner. So I'll be doing that again. So I'm doing a webinar with them tonight. And it's a great organization. You can sign up, they'll send you free materials, and you can join local organizations. So if you work with parents and you have a student with ADHD, help them find out about their local CHAD, and they'll get some great resources. Okay, so these are the Mount Rushmore of ADHD individuals. Okay, so now I like to start by really diving into these great studies on the brain. So what we now know about ADHD is this is truly a neurodiverse population. These are individuals that do not have a typically developing brain. This is a true neurodevelopmental disorder. So the brain imaging studies that have been done on individuals with diagnosed ADHD confirm that people with ADHD have differences in brain structure. And this is truly a disorder of the brain. And now we know it's all three specific areas. So ADHD causes differences in brain structure, function, and development. All three main areas of the brain are affected in individuals with ADHD. The structure of the brain is different. Some people are locked up. I think they're locked. Oh no, they're coming in. Nice. Okay, so ADHD causes differences in brain structure. The structure of the brain is different. The function, how the brain functions, all the different chemicals and endorphins and everything within the brain function differently, and the development. It's an overall delayed brain maturation. So this is a very important theme here that we're going to learn about in terms of a delay. The maturation of the brain is delayed in individuals with ADHD. So in terms of the structure, we have smaller, less active, less developed brain regions. 3 to 10% reduced regional volumes in 5 different regions. And the same parts of the brain impacted by ADHD are the same areas that deal with emotions, self-awareness, and self-regulation. So even in today's DSM, when you look up ADHD, you're not going to see a lot there about emotions and emotion management and self-regulation. You're not going to see too much there. It's going to be a lot of focus on attention deficit and hyperactivity and inattentiveness. And we're going to dive even deeper into that. But we now know that there is a huge emotional aspect to ADHD and executive functions. And what you all should be doing during this whole presentation is start to take little bits of information that I'm talking about and applying it to some of the students and some of the kids that you know, piece by piece. Start to think, okay, I see that, and we need to start to piece together the external behaviors and what's happening internally. Because part of this old, outdated view on ADHD and EF is this intensive focus on the external hyperactivity, external inattentiveness. Kids who can't sit still, kids who can't focus, kids who are lazy, kids who are disinterested. But now we're learning internally what's happening and what's causing those external behaviors. And if we treat the internal, we can see external progress. So we know the limbic system, the amygdala, which is the emotional center of the brain, is much smaller in ADHD. The anterior cingulate, where we make social and emotional decisions, much less activation with ADHD. So there's that little hint for a social component to ADHD, a major aspect of social skills, social executive functions, not just an academic-based disorder, and much less activation within the frontal lobe overall. So in terms of structure, function, and development, we're seeing significant changes here. And these brain scan studies that we've done over the past 10 years are truly groundbreaking in that this is a true disorder of the brain. This is a neurodiverse population. And there's much less of a true development. We know the brain develops from back to front. So it starts from the back and it develops over time to the front of the brain. And that front of the brain is not fully developed until around between 25 and 30 years old. So this prefrontal cortex right here, right behind the forehead, which is the home of executive functions, is not fully developed into true young adulthood. But we have young kids and teens struggling with ADHD, where they're 3 to 5 to 7 years behind their typical peers in these skills: emotion management, self-awareness, self-regulation, social and emotional decisions. Significant life independent skills that are delayed beyond what their peers are. They're struggling with it because that's not fully developed in kids yet. Kids make mistakes, kids have breakdowns, kids have tantrums, yes. But here we have kids where this is happening on a daily basis. It's a chronic issue because they're so far beyond their peers, because this is a true brain disorder. Okay? So this prefrontal cortex, we now know from all these great brain scan studies, this is a social organ of the brain. We are able to initiate and maintain social relationships because of our prefrontal cortex. The prefrontal cortex is basically like an Excel sheet in the brain where we are able to list every single person we know, and if we've had positive interactions with them, negative interactions with them, do we trust them, what do we owe them, do they owe us? It's needed to maintain social relationships. So this prefrontal cortex is where we get our regulation and our motivation in social and all environments. And this prefrontal cortex, what this gives us a skill that truly separates human beings from all other living species. So this prefrontal cortex, humans are the only species that can sustain a behavior long over time in the absence of a direct consequence. And human beings are the only living species that can do that. We can work towards getting accepted to college year after year after year. We can work towards getting into the college of our dreams in 9th grade, even though it's 4 or 5 years into the future. We can work towards getting that learner's permit, that driver's license. We can take driver's ed long before we're able to fully drive. We can work towards a goal that is so far into the future, and that direct consequence, whether it's a positive or negative consequence, right? We can work and sustain our behavior without that consequence staring at us right in the face. Because we have the ability to pause. And that's what this prefrontal cortex allows us to do. We can sustain a behavior over time because we have the ability to pause. And it's what we do in this pause that separates us and allows us to develop these executive functions. Because that's what we're doing. We're pausing and using our executive functions. The old phrase, stop and think, stop and think. That's a very vague phrase, right? But it's really stop and use your executive functions. Stop and aim your behavior towards the future. And this is what allows humans to have goal-oriented behavior. Not like animals that are constantly searching for food and shelter and safety and things like that. We're able to work towards something that is in the distant future. Whether it's, you know, a college degree or a dream job or a peer goal, whatever it may be, we can work towards something even if the direct consequence is not going to affect us today, tomorrow, next week, next month. We can work towards something over time. And this is our executive functioning skill. We know about that famous marshmallow test, right? Right? And the ability to delay gratification. You wait for the doctor to come back in the room, you resist eating that one marshmallow, and if you resist eating it, you get a second marshmallow. And they follow those children over time, and the individuals who were able to resist ended up having, you know, better outcomes. And of course, that's been duplicated many, many times with, you know, changes based on, you know, race and gender and all those sorts of things. So it's a difficult study in many ways. But overall, the ability to delay gratification has a high correlation to success. So goal-oriented behavior. We have the ability to create, keyword there is create, and sustain motivation over time, even with a delay. And that is so huge. And think about what that means for our students in the classroom. We talk about study skills and preparation. How much of that is really just the ability to motivate themselves? Is it really that they don't know how to study? The studying really isn't that complicated. It's rereading your notes, it's, you know, looking over different things. But the ability to sustain motivation, create motivation over time with a delay. The test is until Friday, I don't know what to do now. The ability to see into the future and sustain motivation is super important. Okay, and you know, we look at social media nowadays, and you're going to see a lot of ADHD videos, these influencers with ADHD, talking about how ADHD is a gift. I wouldn't be an entrepreneur, I wouldn't be famous, I wouldn't be a YouTuber if it wasn't for my ADHD, right? But what is ADHD? What does the data show us? ADHD is an incredibly serious disorder. It is linked to all of these things as an increased risk. Substance abuse, driving accidents, risky behaviors, violence, job loss, and early death. Dr. Russell Barkley, who's the worldwide leader on ADHD, he had a twin brother with ADHD who died in a car accident very young. It's really interesting. So like you hear about people like Michael Phelps, the decorated Olympian who has ADHD. And because of his ADHD, he was able to really hyper-focus on swimming and become an amazing Olympian. But you look back at the story, and you look back on the story of his life, his mother recognized that he had these troubles, and they had a great team of doctors where he was able to be diagnosed, and she structured his days by the 15-minute increments. So as soon as he came home from school, he was in the pool for a very structured amount of time. And she got him in the pool and swimming with the most world-renowned swimming coaches in the area. And when that swim coach moved to a new state, she packed up the whole family and followed him to a new state and had him regimented as a swimmer and helped him to be successful and kept him out of trouble. And now that he's retired from swimming and doesn't have that structure anymore, what's happened? He's gotten in trouble a few times, a couple of DUIs and things like that. So it's a really difficult disorder. And Dr. Russell Barkley has this quote, those with ADHD who have become successful did so in spite of their ADHD. Nobody with this disorder would choose to keep it. That's really hard to hear. That's a really difficult, it sounds quite harsh, but you talk to people with ADHD and they agree with that. It's such a difficult disorder to have, and we're going to talk about just how much it impairs all aspects of daily life. And there's a reason why it's so highly correlated to these very dangerous things. So, and in terms of the parenting, studies show that having a child with ADHD is just as distressing to the parent as having a child with autism spectrum disorder. So there's been qualitative studies done involving the parents of both kids. And it's just as distressing to the parents, because if you have a child with ADHD, you're never out of the woods. Every single day is a challenge. Every single day you're working to keep that kid safe. You're working with social relationships. You're working with academics. You're trying to keep them away from screens and the screen addictions, right? You're never out of the woods. It's a constant battle every single day because of their inability to learn from past experiences and apply it to the present. So it's repeating the same mistakes over and over and over, and we'll dive even deeper into that. Okay? Any questions so far? Yep.
Is there any significance or differentiation between ADD and ADHD in the studies that you're citing?
That is an excellent question. So over the past 5 years, they actually completely stopped using the term ADD. So now it's just ADHD. So ADD, it's ADHD inattentive type, ADHD hyperactive type, or ADHD combined type. So there's very few doctors that are up on the most up-to-date research have completely stopped using ADD. It's going to be one of those, things for inattentive, hyperactive, or combined.
Where, I guess, is that differentiation made? Because we see diagnoses here come through on paperwork, and that's not given. It's just umbrella ADHD.
So you're still seeing ADD?
No, my question is, where is that? Like, would we have to go to the doctor, or would the parents communicate to the doctor the different subcategory of those three? Because for us as educators, at least for myself, I'm not seeing that differentiated, and that seems pretty key in how to help them.
Yeah, it's definitely key. We're going to dive a little bit deeper into why the term ADHD is inappropriate altogether. And there's a big push from a lot of the people to change the name of ADHD to something else. And all of the people that I listed before are a major part of that push because it's not an attention deficit at all. So we're going to be talking a lot about what the push is for the new name. But yeah, when you really dive deep into it, it's really not so much about inattentiveness or hyperactiveness. It's a spectrum disorder. You know one kid with ADHD, you know one kid with ADHD. There's no two kids are alike. And we get a little too big on diagnostic labels. Now we have ADHD, we have rejection sensitive dysphoria, we have oppositional defiance disorder. There's all these different things. My son has all these different things, right? It's really, when it all comes back down to it, a lot of it comes back down to this idea of executive functions. So we're definitely going to dive a lot deeper into that. Anyone else? That was an excellent question. Okay, so we're getting right into it now. So ADHD and executive functions. I'm talking about these two terms quite often. What is the comparison between ADHD and executive functions? So executive skills, we have to define it. What are these executive skills? They have been identified as the foundation that all children need to negotiate the demands of childhood and adolescence. So these executive skills are not just your basic organizing your backpack and those sorts of things. These are true life independent skills that become more critical as kids venture off into the world with decreasing parental supervision and guidance. That is super important to understand. When it comes to executive function skills, the key thing to understand is decreasing parental and adult supervision. So executive functions are independent skills that you're doing independently, or you are not reliant on the parents and the adults in your life because you're able to do it independently. And like I said before, these skills develop gradually during the first 2 decades of life, peaking at around 25 and 30 years old. So executive functions, we know, are mostly strengthened through interpersonal relationships and meaningful experiences. So it takes 25 to 30 years of relationships and experiences to really develop that prefrontal cortex. And in today's world of screens, and we were just in quarantine for a year, on lockdown for a year, what are we seeing less and less of? Relationships and experiences, right? Relationships now are on TikTok and Snapchat and Discord and on the internet. Oh, my son has friends, but they're all on Fortnite, they're all on Minecraft, they're all on Roblox, they're all on Discord, right? We're not seeing as much face-to-face play and interaction now. And we're seeing much less experiences Kids are not going out and playing on the playground and riding bikes anymore. They're at home in the basement on the iPad, on the screens, and every single day looks the same. Kids go to school, they go home, they stay home. I'm not saying this is every kid, but this is what we're seeing a lot of now. So we're seeing much less lack of varied experiences and much less interpersonal relationships. And those two things are crucial to EF development over the first 30 years. So what we are seeing now with ADHD is it's not a disorder of attention at all. So this is going back to the great question before. ADHD really isn't about attention, it's about performance. So here's a great image of the ADHD brain. So the front, so the back is knowledge, is where we learn, and the front, the prefrontal cortex, is where we perform. The front is where we do. So ADHD splits the brain in half between performance and learning. And this is why we see so many kids that are above average IQ, do well on standardized tests, can do well on regular testing in the classroom, but then forget it a day later after they finish the test. So they know what to do. This is not a disorder of intelligence. They know what to do. They just can't use it at the point of performance. They know the social skills that they learned in those hours of social groups, playing Pop the Pig and Uno and all those things, right? So they know what to do. They just can't perform. So we see this all the time with these kids, and this makes it so tricky. And this is why these kids get labeled hyperactive, inattentive, lazy, disinterested, non-compliant, because we know that they can do, they have the knowledge, they can show it sometimes, but when it comes time to show what they know, to interact with a peer, have reciprocity, play nicely on the playground, participate in class, go home and get your homework done, follow through on your goals, do all of those things. At the point of performance is where they fall apart. So the ability to show what you know is significantly delayed with ADHD, and it causes these kids to be underestimated because we're assuming they don't know what to do. They know what to do, it's hard for them to call on it in the moment. And we're going to talk about time blindness and the inability to call on this information. Any questions about that? All right, so like I was saying, so we're talking now about the past versus the present. There's been a lot of really outdated views on ADHD, and I was just talking to some of your great teachers, is there's still a lot of doctors out there that are still going off of these outdated views. There's a lot of people that are not up to speed now on this great research on ADHD, so it's super important you get this information out there. In the past, executive functions were looked at as an external behavioral-based disorder. Everything was about what we saw externally. Hyperactive, kids who can't sit still. Inattentive, kids who can't focus. Right? And there was an intensive focus on external organization and time management. So we had this is what led to the rise of these non-certified executive function coaches. And literally anybody can make a website and say, I'm an executive function coach. There's no credentialing agency to say that you're a coach. Anyone can say I'm a coach. It's like being a tutor. It's the same thing. And these individuals would just sit with the kids, sit with them, clean out their backpacks, organize papers into folders, sit with them while they work to hold them accountable, and do all of these, use all of these external supports. It's like a 504 in a public school, where we're creating all these external accommodations, where it's extended time on tests, do your tests in a separate room, sit closer to the teacher. You get all these external check-ins. And we talked before about what are executive functions. It's the ability to be independent and not so reliant on adults. So what did these executive function coaches do? They kept these kids prompt dependent. They created a short-term Band-Aid for the external behavioral-based problems, where, okay, someone sat with them and made sure they didn't play, Geometry Dash or addictingmathgames.com while they were supposed to do their homework, right? So they sat with them and made sure they stayed on task and got their work done. But what happens once they go to college? they fall apart because they were never given the internal skills, the internal therapy, not the coaching, to develop the internal independent skills. And now over the past 5 to 10 years, America now leads the world in first semester college dropouts. And the vast majority of those students were individuals who did quite well in high school, but they had those 60, 70-page IEPs or those 504s with every copy and pasted accommodation in the database, right? And parents now have been conditioned to go into those meetings saying, there's no way my son or daughter is aging out of that IEP. There's no way there's no way you're taking away the IEP. There's no way you're taking away the 504. I want every accommodation. I want every service. I want every single thing. Because we're not putting any of the accountability in any of the work on the student. It's all going on to the teachers to provide the accommodations and to do all the work and keep these kids dependent. We have to start to think about what can this kid do when this IEP and this 504 goes away. The IEP and the 504 is not a permanent document. We have to start to remember that. It's not going to be with this kid forever. Colleges may say that they have an Office of Disability Services, and we provide individual counseling and individual help. We have a writing center. But we all know colleges fall way too short on that, no matter what type of college it is. Colleges will never be able to provide the support that a high school can with an IEP, right? We have to start to think about an exit plan when it comes to IEPs and 504s. And a lot of that comes from executive functions. So with this outdated view on ADHD and EF came the recommendations that have now been proven to be ineffective, and mostly ineffective. Has anyone here heard of educational therapy? So this is really big on the West Coast. So this is a huge thing on the West Coast, where it's basically a fancy term for an executive function coach, except if you're an educational therapist, you can charge $300, $400 an hour, where you're basically coaching the students up and creating these systems and keeping them prompt dependent. So it's once again creating external supports. There's been lots of studies that show that your typical social skills group can actually make ADHD external symptoms worse. So social skills groups for kids with social executive functioning problems, which we'll dive into, have proven to not be so effective. It needs to be a very particular type of unstructured hangout group, not your structured group with turn taking and very adult directed. Individuals with ADHD going to OT without that secondary sensory diagnosis, being set there for self-regulation. ABA for behavior, cognitive behavioral therapy. We'll dive deeper into how that's unhelpful. EMDR, which is the eye movement training. Brain balance centers. You guys heard of brain balance? Good, good, nice. So it's gotten to the point now where the American Academy of Pediatrics has come out and said, no, we are going to simplify our recommendations for kids with ADHD for parents to make it easier for them, because there's a lot of really bad recommendations out there. So they basically come out and say, medication, we have to get rid of the stigma of medication, because of course what happens with ADHD medication, there's a huge stigma because they're used on college campuses, of course, right? So we have to start to educate on the benefits of medication, but we know that that can be really hard on parents because finding the right medication, finding the right dosage, it can affect sleep, it can affect appetite. It's really hard on parents to see their kids struggle during that trial and error process, right? But once you find the right medication and the right dosage, it could really be a really beautiful thing. So with medication, parent training is super important, parent coaching. Parent coaching has got to be an aspect of ADHD executive functioning therapy so that it can transfer into the natural environment, super important. And we also have to focus on the internal long-term skill building instead of accommodations. Because no matter how much we grow with the neurodiversity movement and everything, to think that these individuals are going to be accommodated, through college and job and career, it's super important to develop these skills so they can self-advocate, self-regulate, self-motivate, and work towards their own individual goals. So we have an outdated view, and we're moving more towards the internal. Okay, so there's been a massive discussion over the past 5 years, like we said before, about changing the name of ADHD, because it's really a really terrible name. And there was recently a pretty famous YouTube video, I think it was like the Holderness family or something like that. You guys know that? Where the guy's singing about how ADHD, you know what I'm talking about? Where the guy's singing about how ADHD is a terrible name. Like 15 different parents sent it to me. So he's basically singing in his house about how ADHD is a bad name. You can check that out, it's pretty funny. But yeah, it really is a terrible, terrible name. And there's been a couple of names thrown out, you know, to replace it, because this whole term of attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, this is part of what's leading these kids into these ineffective and unhelpful therapies. Because it's attention deficit, like, come on, like go get a coffee, get some sleep, get off your screens, like come on, like you can do this, pay attention, get motivated. This has to be the parents' fault, right? We have to understand the seriousness of what this disorder leads to. So self-regulation deficit disorder, that's been thrown around a little bit. Delayed gratification disorder, not so great. Attention to the future disorder. Exactly. Well said. And VAST, variable attention stimulus trait. That's a good one, but it still focuses a little bit too much on the attention piece. And it's really not about attention, it's about performance. And it's definitely not an attention deficit, it's an abundance of attention. Kids with ADHD have too much attention to give, and they respond to every stimuli in the environment because they have too much attention. So where does attention deficit come from, right? So we have to move away from attention because attention seems too external. We have to go back to the internal. Thoughts on those? Pretty bad? Yep. So ADHD, the big term now is executive functioning developmental delay, EFDD. So this is the phrase here, or executive functioning developmental disorder. But EFDD is what Dr. Russell Barkley, Sarah Ward, the great pioneers in this field are pushing for ADHD to become. Because ADHD is a disorder of executive functioning, period. You can have an executive functioning problem and not have ADHD, of course, but if you have ADHD, your disorder is in executive functioning. So I have parents call me all the time and say, oh, my son has ADHD and executive functioning challenges. There's no end there. If you have ADHD, you have an executive functioning disorder. You have a developmental delay of the prefrontal cortex of the executive functioning system. So this is super important to remember. It's a developmental disorder, and it's a developmental delay, where you're 3 to 5 to 7 years behind, depending on severity. There's that spectrum behind your typically developing peers. So if we're moving away from attention deficit, we're moving away from hyperactivity, inattentiveness, we have to start to figure out what are these executive functions that is disordered with EFDD. So we're going to run through the pillars of what EFDD is all about. So number one, self-regulation. So we're going to talk about the main pillars and dive deeper and start to connect the pieces now of everything I'm saying about ADHD, EFDD to some of the students, some of the kids, some of the people you know. So self-regulation, the ability to regulate your emotions, your language, your body, your behavior in various environments towards various stimuli. So the ability to regulate your own body. So when you walk into the playground, when you walk into an unstructured play environment, are you able to pinpoint the kids with ADHD pretty quickly? There you go. So is it hyperactivity or is it internal self-regulation? The inability to regulate your emotions and make your body look like everybody else. The kids with ADHD, is it harder for them to share and deal with disappointment and deal with and brush away provoking from a peer, right? If a peer may provoke them or do something they don't like, is it hard for them to walk away and ignore, right? Because it's hard for them to self-regulate their emotions. They feel big emotions. This is where that rejection sensitive dysphoria comes from, that RSD, right? It's the big emotions, the self-regulation. This is where the whole zones of regulation come in, that whole thing of figuring out how big the emotions are. So self-regulation is a core facet of ADHD, EFDD. This is a true disorder of self-regulation, the inability to regulate yourself internally, which creates these external issues. Self-awareness. So this is a huge one. And this is one of the first executive functions. This is what we have to think about. So this is the ability to be aware of your actions, of your behaviors, of your language, and how you're perceived, how you make yourself look to others. Being self-aware of yourself in a given environment. And this is part of the social executive functioning issues. If you're not self-aware of the cause and effect, of the perspective taking, of the types of thoughts you're putting into other people's heads, how you're making yourself look, the words I'm saying, how they impact others, how they impact my mom, how they impact my dad, how they impact my peers, my teacher, right? Being self-aware is huge. And these kids lack self-awareness. And we're going to talk even deeper about that. Self-motivation towards non-preferred tasks. So that's the big one. So I can't tell you how often parents say to me, there's no way he has ADHD, there's no way he has EFDD, he can play Minecraft for 8 hours. He loves it. He can play Roblox for 8 hours, he can play Fortnite forever, he can do that forever. He can sustain his attention to it forever, right? So self-motivation towards things that don't have instant gratification. And this is part of what drives kids to screen addictions. Their inability to start, persist, and complete non-preferred tasks. They can't self-motivate towards something unless the reward is instant. And what's more instant gratification than an iPad, a video game, a cell phone, all those sorts of things? Being in full control of the screen, the touch screen, the buttons, everything. There's nothing more stimulus response than a video game or a screen. There's no stimulus response for homework and reading and writing, right? So can they motivate themselves towards something where the reward is in the future? Good question?
Yeah, I'm sure you will talk about this later on, but just quickly, I know there's some video games that have been created for ADHD, people that have ADHD. What do you think about that?
I think it's 100% crap. Absolute garbage. So like for an example, in the field of speech and language pathology is the best thing I have to compare it to. Like you'll see all these ads and flyers of like for stuttering and fluency. Like, oh, sign up for this and we'll solve your stutter in a day. You know, you won't stutter anymore if you do this $1,000 program or all those sorts of things. So that is absolute garbage, no way, shape, or form. And we're learning about executive functions here. These are true life skills. So how is playing a video game going to help a student be able to sit down and read a book, to be able to transition from a game to dinner time and to not bring their cell phone to a dinner time? How's it going to help them make friends, keep friends? You cannot ever transfer skills from a video game to real life, period. And there were a couple of research studies recently about how video games are good for the brain. Video games are like exercise for the brain. And when you look at the details of the study, there's a lot of issues with the study, and there's very little actual correlation between video games and brain development and helping the brain. So the American Academy of Pediatrics will never endorse those video games for ADHD. That's more of an FDA regulated thing. But it's ridiculous. It's all a money grab, and it's all part of, big pharma trying to get you to sign up for things. Great question. Thanks for bringing that up. So self-regulation, self-awareness, self-motivation. The inability to motivate oneself towards something that is not instantly gratifying. Self-evaluation. So this is a huge one. Self-evaluation is the ability to learn from past experiences and apply it to the present moment, which is basically that performance thing we talked about before, right? You're learning from past experience, you know what to do, and now you perform and you don't repeat the mistake. What do kids with ADHD, EFDD do? They repeat the same mistake over and over and over again. The typical consequences, the typical issues don't help these kids because of their time blindness and their inability to learn from the past. And we'll dive even deeper into that. And self-language. So we're going to talk a lot about the internal self-language and exactly what that is. Any questions on these? So these right here are the 4 main pillars of EFDD. Self-regulation, self-awareness, self-motivation, self-evaluation. These are the true executive function skills. When you can read Smart but Scattered by Peg Dawson, you can look at George McCloskey, you can look at Dr. Russell Barkley, whatever it may be, and you're going to have task initiation, organization, you're going to have time management, you're going to have all these separate executive functioning skills. It all comes back down to these. There's no organization without self-regulation and self-motivation and self-awareness. There's no time management without these skills. So all of those subset skills people like to talk about, these are the foundational pillars right here. So you're not going to see any organization. You're not going to see backpacks, rooms cleaned, time management, understanding time, all of those things, unless we focus on these 4 things that's built upon self-language. Yep?
Would you say that the lack of willingness or self-evaluation, self-motivation, and all of the above contributes to the dropout rate of first semester college students because they have to go and actively seek those accommodations?
Of course, yeah, that's a huge part of it.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So like on top of not necessarily being fully prepared and fully staffed to be able to handle the influx of kids that we have nowadays with this, it is also then basically setting them up for failure by having them have to seek that out themselves and be able to do all of that, which they're lacking.
100%.
Okay.
Yeah, that's exactly it. So IEPs, 504s, high schools, inadvertently sometimes keep kids prompt dependent, right? So the counselor, the SLP, the teacher does the check-ins, provides that federally mandated IEP, provides those accommodations, and then what happens when that IEP goes away, when the high school staff goes away and you're in a brand new environment? Because most of the time what we're seeing is these kids go to college and they don't know how to manage their own screen time. That's the biggest thing, is they end up in the dorms, playing video games all day, on their phones all day. They never check their college email. They don't know how to email their teacher to set up office hours or read through the syllabus or figure things out. They end up sitting in the dorm, sitting in the dorm room, and before you know it, they have a whole snowball of missing work. So that's one of the biggest issues. So these kids get good grades and they get accepted into these colleges, but executive function skills are very hard to test and very hard to measure, which we'll talk about. So colleges are worried about money, colleges worry about admissions. They want to have a certain number of students. So they bring the students in because of their really good GPA and maybe some extracurriculars and things like that. But once they're on campus, they don't have the independent skills to survive without constant adult help. And think about that massive leap from 12th grade to freshman year of college. That is a massive leap of independence, where you have to be able to put your phone away, reach out to your teachers, meet with them during office hours, join clubs, find your classes. It's not super structured like school, where first period this, second period this. You have class once or twice a week, and you got to go find it yourself. And some of your classes have 300 people in it, right? That's a massive leap that we are not preparing kids for. And part of it is the system, because what are we doing in public and private schools? We're so focused on standardized testing, right? We have to teach to the test. And that's part of the issue with the big system here, is we have to constantly make sure our students are well prepared for the testing that we have to give them at the end of the year, whether it's state testing or federal testing. It's not so much the independent skills that they truly need.
I have a question.
Yep.
If you have a kid with autism,
Mhm.
spectrum disorder, don't you see many of the same?
Of course, yeah. Kids
So
with
how do you determine which is which?
well, if they have autism, that's the primary diagnosis. You know, autism is, you know, and autism labels, you know, varies in severity, of course.
Right.
But if they have autism, most likely they have ADHD. But autism is the primary diagnosis.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's the number one thing. So the vast majority of students, so autism is a global delay, a global brain delay. ADHD is more specific. So if you have autism, most likely you have ADHD, and if you have autism, you have executive functioning challenges, right? But autism is that primary diagnosis, and that has to be treated in its own unique way. This is not a presentation about autism, this is a presentation about ADHD, right? So I'm not talking of it. So if you have an individual with autism, that has to be treated in its own unique way. Does that make sense? Yep.
I have a question to piggyback off the college topic. So in high school, if that's all true, why in high school do we have students with accommodations that say you can get extended time on an assessment, but the student has to advocate for it? You're saying the student's not going to do that. We see that the student's not going to do that.
Yep.
Why is that even on their?
Because that's typically how it's written in the goal bank. That gets copied and pasted into the 504. You know, teachers don't have a lot of time on their hands with all the work that they have, with the caseloads they have, and all that kind of stuff, where 504s tend to get copied and pasted from other 504s onto others, and it's not teachers' fault. It's part of the system and the you know, lack of support staff and lack of numbers and all those sorts of things, where that's typically how it's written. That's how it's been in the past. I see some schools helping with that, where the teachers can remind them, hey, you get extended time, that sort of stuff. But if it's left to the kid to self-advocate, 9 times out of 10, 10 times out of 10, it's not going to work. It's a waste of the time. And this is part of the reasons why 504s are not federally mandated. I can't tell you how many schools I partner with and train where they have students with 504s, they don't even know it. They have no idea that kid had a 504, that they were never told. You know, it's so different than an IEP. So there's a lot of problems with 504s, there's a lot of problems with IEPs, and we were kind of born into the system, right? IDEA, Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, and the whole idea of IEPs and 504s and services and this and that. It's, in many ways, it's a broken system. There's lots of positives, yes, lots of kids are getting the services they need, yes, but when it comes to something like this that is so misunderstood, it can tend to hurt the child, because they're not getting the correct services and they're not building the appropriate internal skills. Does that make sense? Yep.
Yeah, and that's a good question about that extended time. I wonder, and I imagine this is where you're going, is when students develop the skills to self-advocate and take advantage of that extended time, then that is beneficial to them, I would
Of course,
suppose.
Absolutely.
So I do think that our students who have developed that skill set through decreasing number of prompts over time would be able to access that extended time, which would be beneficial to them. I think that where you're going next.
Wow, that's impressive. Have you seen this presentation before?
No.
Did you sneak in? That's why you were giving me Asian food before. You want to sneak in and check out the slides. Well done, well done. So we're going to talk a lot about fading prompts, and that's really what it is. So you can have on a kid's 504 fading prompts. You can have on a 504 extended time on tests, or it can be Tommy will self-advocate for extended time with fading prompts towards independence, those sorts of things, right? See the difference there? So you're teaching them self-advocacy skills, but parents are trained to go into these IEP meetings, go into these 504 meetings, roll up their sleeves and fight for every 504 accommodation there is, right? Give my kid extended time, give my kid this, give my kid that, not realizing that it's not helping, right? They look at you not giving every accommodation as an insult, where they need everything, right? but we have to start to focus on them developing the skills so the 504 and the IEP has an exit plan. Right? Cool. So when it comes to executive functions, there are 3 main zones here we have to think about. So of course we know about academic executive functions. So for years and years and years, ADHD and executive functions were looked at as an academic-based disorder, right? Kids were diagnosed with ADHD because of trouble in school. They were diagnosed with executive functioning problems because of trouble in school. They would leave things at school that they needed for homework, their backpack would be a mess, they would never use their agenda, they would forget their homework, they couldn't get started, they couldn't get things done. Executive functioning and ADHD was a school-based problem, right? So that's only one facet of the equation. We also have home executive functions. So executive functioning in the home, and we're seeing that a lot now. Number one, with excessive screen time and an inability to get off screens. And one of the biggest things we're seeing is self-regulation and behaviors towards parents. And from my clinical experience, this tends to be behaviors towards the moms. So the vast majority of kids with ADHD are boys. Girls are widely underdiagnosed. That's very important to state. Girls are incredibly underdiagnosed with ADHD, so it's a lot of boys with ADHD that have more external behaviors. A lot of girls tend to internalize things. But home executive functioning tends to be a lot of dysregulation, yelling, screaming, all those sorts of things towards the parents and towards the moms. So you see that a lot in the home, and it's really, really tough. And a lot of parents are at the point now where they know if they decrease screen time, they put blocks on the phone, they take the video games away, what am I going to do? He's going to break everything in the house. He's going to freak out. I'm going to have to call the police. What am I going to do? And they dig themselves into this incredibly deep hole of setting themselves up for this really difficult period of dysregulation. So it's really, really hard. So there's academic executive functioning, home executive functioning, and social executive functions, which we'll dive even deeper into. So this is part of the reason why those typical social skills, social pragmatics, are not effective for these kids, because it's not social skills, it's social executive functioning, which is unbelievably, incredibly different than social skills. Something that's, it formed in those social skills groups. So it's important to understand the difference there. Okay, so like I was saying earlier, no matter who you're reading, who you're researching, whether it's Sarah Ward, Dr. Russell Barkley, George McCloskey, Peg Dawson, no matter who great pioneer in this field you're looking at, you're going to get a different definition of what executive functioning is. And most of the people are just going to give you a list of the skills. They're just going to say, here are the executive function skills, period. These are the skills. My favorite definition of executive functions is Dr. Russell Barkley's definition. And this is how he describes it. So executive functions are defined as in action to the self. So get used to me doing this motion here. I'll be doing this a lot. So in action to the self. Okay? So it's what you are doing to yourself. In action to the self, designed to change one's self, to change one's distant future. Okay? To change self's future. You stop responding to the world around you, responding to the external stimuli. You stop and take an action to the self. So every executive functioning skill can be defined as an action to the self. And this is why we looked at the pillars before. It was all self-regulation, self-motivation, self-evaluation, self-awareness. Executive function skills are actions to the self, self-based behaviors. We have to move away from the external time management, external organization, external task initiation. We have to start looking at the self. We're not responding to the outside world. We are taking an action to the self, designed to change oneself to improve one's future, to improve the chances of getting a positive consequence, or to decrease the chances of well, to improve the chances of avoiding a negative consequence, right? So we're becoming future thinkers. We're taking an action to the self designed to change oneself to improve the future. So basically, one of the best ways to think about it is executive functions. We stop the self, we stop from what we would have done on impulse. So there's that word impulse, impulsivity. You hear all the time with ADHD and executive functions, right? But now we're diving even deeper. We're focusing on the internal. We're not just focusing so much on behaviors. So executive functions allow you to stop self from what you would have done on impulse without stopping to think. But if you stop and think, you're doing your second choice, your third choice, your fourth choice, because you went through your self-language, which we'll get into. So stopping self, because the ADHD brain does stimulus response, stimulus response, stimulus response. It thrives on stimulus response, which is what screens do and video games do and phones do. But we have to go back to the stop and think. And the stop and think is where executive functions come in. Think of stop and think as an unbelievably vague phrase, and we're going to dive deeper into what that think really means. Okay? So executive functions are used as an opportunity to turn away from all of the seductions of the moment, the instant gratifications of the moment. I'm going to use my executive function skills to keep myself from playing these games for 5 hours. I'm going to use this to keep myself from getting in trouble in class. I'm going to get done what needs to be done now so I have a better tomorrow and a better week. Turn away from the seductions of the moment. Subject yourself to adversity and hardships to change a distant future and consequence. That's using your executive functions. And think about this. This is the whole process of college, right? Throughout college, you subject yourself to, you're working towards taking the SATs, taking the ACTs, filling out the Common App, doing all of that work to get yourself into that college, because you know if you get that college degree, you'll make $10,000 more than people who don't get that degree, right? So you're working towards that future consequence. You're working towards that future. You're in college for 4 years just to get that degree at the end of 4 years. So you're subjecting yourself to the adversity and hardships, all the tests, all the GPAs, all the meetings, everything, just to get that degree at the end of 4 years. So you're working towards a distant goal. All deferred gratification requires self-regulation. Dr. Russell Barkley talks about this all the time. If there is anything that is correlated with long-term success in human beings, it is the ability to defer gratification. Research study after research study after research study shows the benefit of individuals who can defer gratification, who are able to subject themselves to hardships and adversity in the moment and have fun later, right? And what are we seeing with kids today? A true inability to do that, because they're growing up in an instant gratification world, right? So here's a great cartoon with the wife amoeba yelling at the husband amoeba, stimulus response, don't you ever think. Comes home from work and just wants to watch TV. Okay? So, like I said before, we're talking so much about these internal skills, self-regulation, self-motivation, self-evaluation, self-awareness. How are we going to measure these skills? We live in a school system now where everything has to be measured, right? There has to be a grade, there has to be a standard score, there has to be a standard deviation, there has to be a raw score, there has to be an age equivalent, a grade equivalent. Especially in the public schools with IEPs and 504s, everything has to be scored. Everything has to be compared to a bell curve. But how are we going to measure someone's internal skills? So right here, just like we said before, from prompt dependence to independence. So if we are able to measure how many prompts a student needs to self-advocate, to get started, to have a positive interaction with peers, to get their books out, to take everything home for homework, to get their room cleaned at home. If we figure out how many prompts are needed, how many visual cues, how many verbal prompts, how many tactile prompts, what the whole prompt hierarchy, how many prompts are needed for the student to initiate, persist, and complete. So the more we think about prompt dependence versus independence, prompt dependence versus independence, reliance on the self, reliance on others, and then reliance on the self, that's going to help us be able to measure executive functions. Because when you look at the testing now, for when kids get diagnosed with ADHD, what's all the testing like? What kind of testing do the kids do? You guys know? It's all parent checklists, basically, right? So there's the brief, which is the behavior rating inventory of executive functions. There's the parent rating scale, the teacher rating scale, and for older kids, the self-reporting rating scale. There's the McCloskey scales. There's the self-rating scale. The vast majority of ADHD testing and executive functioning testing out there is filled out by the adults and the people who are around the kid the most. It's not like your basic math, science, articulation, reading, writing tests where the kids are doing the work. To measure executive functions in ADHD, it's the people that observe the child filling out observational scales. And it's always going to be that way. There is never going to be a standardized test, a true test the child does that measures executive functions. It is impossible and it's never going to happen. So we're talking about executive functions, and it's basically your imagination. Executive functions is your internal processes, your imagination, right? And we can't measure that with a standardized test. That can't be measured. So it's always going to be these checklists filled out by adults to see what's happening in the varying environments. Does that all make sense? Yep.
Now, when you ask students that have ADHD or have been told that they have it or anything like that, they will quickly tell you, oh, I get distracted easily. Do you think that that is more a learned response? Do you think the response would be different if they were not directly told that ADHD has this connection to an inability to focus? If you took a random kid off the street that has never been exposed to it, but has it, would they say something different, do you think?
Yes, I think it's a mix of both. I think it's a mix of misinformation that's out there, yes, of course. And I also think it's due to the lack of self-awareness. So, they hear a lot of misinformation from pediatricians, from doctors, from parents, and, oh, you can't focus, you have to take these pills, and you have to do this kind of stuff. But it's also a lack of self-awareness, right? So it's an inability to, you can easily say, oh, I get distracted. Kids love to say, oh, I'm too hyper, I can't focus, I'm bored. They keep it very vague and simple, but when we build self-awareness to, hey, it's hard for me to visualize or talk to myself, which we'll talk about, then, the more we educate the kids, then we can get a better response to that question, definitely. It's a great question. Any other questions? Cool. All right. So, with prompt dependence, so kids with ADHD and executive functioning developmental delay are prompt dependent, and this is their core issue. Prompt dependence, where adults are acting as the child's executive functioning system. The parents are always there to save them. The kids are never allowed to struggle. They have to have 60, 70-page IEPs, every accommodation in the book, where the parents are the executive functioning system and the kid never has a chance to practice it. The longer this is done, the longer the development of these skills will be delayed. It's very important that we treat the internal and start to focus on prompt dependence. This is super important. So, we were talking about this before, about, yep, you have a question?
Just to go back to this slide
Sure.
before, I remember reading an article that said that more and more college students are being diagnosed with ADHD later on, and it's not that, they're just getting it. They've
Yep.
always had it, but because they had all of this, doing the work for them, and then all of a sudden they're on their own,
Yep.
oops, we have, but technically, finally, a diagnosis. It's not that they just got it. It's just that they were having too much help.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
you know.
Yeah, and that's exactly it. Do many of them truly have ADHD? We don't know unless we're able to dive really deeper and really take a look at their brain sorts of things. Or did they spend their entire high school experience playing lots of video games, tons of support at school, never really having to struggle and figure things out on their own, not a lot of interpersonal relationships. You know, the life of a teenager now is so different than it was 20-something years ago. You know, kids signing up for after-school clubs and getting involved in the communities and going out and riding bikes and playing sports and doing these things. Now it's a lot of, you know, e-sports and social media and all those sorts of things. And it's affecting kids' brains. It's affecting mental health. You know, so much of what we're seeing now is this mental health crisis in teens. How much of that is because of their lack of executive functioning and their lack of ability to be self-aware and self-cope, right? It's really a different world that we're exposing them to. So, yeah, we're seeing skyrocketing diagnosis rates of ADHD, but a lot of it is due to this incredible jump that we have between 12th grade and college. It's unmanageable for most kids. Okay? So we were talking about earlier what it takes to get into college. You have to have those strong grades and those sorts of things. But what does the research tell us? What are the true predictors of success? And this is what the research tells us. These three things. If an individual is able to do these three things in life, there is a high chance for long-term success in life. So number one, the ability to independently, not prompt-dependent, independently form and maintain social relationships. That is super important. The ability to form, go out and meet new people, introduce yourselves, talk to them, get to know them, have reciprocity, 50-50, and maintain relationships over time. If an individual can do that, there's a good chance they're set up for long-term success in life. And the ability to live independently. The ability to independently manage emotions, because we all know emotions are a big part of long-term success. You're not going to be able to hold a job if you can't manage your emotions on your job, right? Everyone deals with stress, everyone deals with hard days, everyone needs to cope and take a break and regulate their emotions, right? Not everyone has a great supervisor or a great role and a great environment, great work environment, but the ability to manage your emotions over time is crucial. Ability to manage your life and independent problem solving. So the ability to figure out how to pay the bills, how to grocery shop, how to cook, how to find your way around your community, how to meet people, how to get a job, keep a job, and maintain all the different aspects of independent problem solving. So you see here, we don't see anything here about math, science, social studies, all the different things that we have to teach in school because of standardized testing and the way we are in this country. But we look at these things, these are true independent executive functions. And when you look at worldwide educational systems, you look at like the educational system in Finland, for example, which is like #1 in the world in terms of their education, where teachers are highly respected, they're well paid, and it's a great work environment. These are the three things they focus on at school. Every single student in their educational system gets twice a week counseling. They do community partnerships where the kids go out in the community and meet people on the job and interact with people. It's lots of project-based learning, not just multiple choice tests all the time. And it's focused on independent skills. These are the true predictors of success. Not so much of these academic skills that we push as part of standardized testing. And you know, we're even seeing it now in kindergarten and preschool, where the days of free play in kindergarten are disappearing, and now we're seeing the rise of baby Einstein and Kumon and making, you know, kids having to know letters and numbers and shapes and everything before, and they have to be kindergarten ready. There's no such thing as kindergarten ready. Okay, let's get that understood. Preschool is all about play. Let the kids play and let them come up and grow. We're getting a little too focused on academic skills instead of allowing kids to gain independent skills. So the Harvard Center of the Developing Child, they have found that children who develop strong executive functions experience lifelong benefits. So executive function skills create long-term independence and long-term success. And with these executive functions, children are able to make healthy and positive choices. And there's no better time than now to give these kids the help that they need. In the past, we went off of outdated methods, outdated views, and we did not help these kids in very manageable ways, kept them prompt dependent. But now all of this research that we have and all this knowledge that we have, we can truly help these kids. We just have to spread the knowledge, spread the information, help these kids in positive ways. And we know that these skills are developed through varied experiences and interpersonal relationships. So we have to start to focus on the importance of those two things. Okay, so here's a great image here that I use with a lot of my students. It's a great image here of the comfort zone going into the growth zone. So I'm giving a little bit of background now and just what kind of a world these kids are growing up in, right? So we talk about ADHD executive functions, but what strengthens executive functions are relationships and experiences. But in today's world, it's hard to do that. So here are some examples of the growth mindset, which is basically every teacher's dream, right? Look at all of these bullet points here. You want all of your students to have these skills, don't you? This is the dream classroom. You want your students to experience high challenge, love to be challenged by the information, relaxed, emotionally engaged, take risks in their learning, comfortable making mistakes, learning through trial and error, flexible, motivated, able to follow feedback. We want our kids to be able to go into that growth zone, but kids today find that comfort zone and stick in it. Yeah, exactly. So they find that comfort zone and they stay in it, right? Think about the kids you know right now. They find 1, 2, 3 things that they're good at, and 10 times out of 10, 9 times out of 10, that's going to be a phone or a video game or whatever, and they stick with it. And every day starts to look the same, where they don't have time for new experiences. They are too scared to leave their comfort zone, and they stay in that comfort zone, and sometimes parents accommodate those fears, and they get stuck in that comfort zone. And it's hard for them to go into the growth zone, to find purpose, live dreams, and set new goals. So a lot of this is this world of instant gratification kids are growing up in. So when we were all kids, what was the dream job that everybody had? Everyone wanted to grow up to become what? An astronaut. There you go, an astronaut. Everyone wanted to be an astronaut. And now, what's the dream job of today's kids?
A YouTuber.
A YouTuber. Everyone wants to be a YouTuber. And why is that?
Because they make a lot of money, they don't do anything.
They don't, exactly. They think they can do it overnight. They think that they can play a video game, record themselves playing the video game, and make money doing it. So they value natural, effortless accomplishment over achievement through effort. They do not care about what's happening behind the scenes. They want results and they want it now. So any thought of a job where they have to work up a ladder and be challenged and use effort is way too scary for them, right? If I become a YouTuber, I can just play my games, make millions of dollars, and be famous. Can't tell you how many kids think that's going to happen to them these days. It's very weird. So basically, they want fun and they want results now. And think about what this world offers them, right? High-speed internet. They have a question. You know, there's no more debate, there's no more conversation, there's no more back and forth debate anymore. Just Google the answer. I can't tell you how many times kids come to my clinic for therapy and they want to get their homework done first, and the homework is really just testing their ability to use Google. That's really all it is. So they see the question on the worksheet, they Google the answer, and they put it in the worksheet. That's it. It's testing how fast they are at using Google and copying and pasting the answer. They're not grabbing a dictionary or grabbing the textbook and going through it, they're just Googling the answers. And you can't blame them for it, because Google is a tool they're going to have for the rest of their lives. Touch screens, YouTube, Amazon, next day, same day delivery, right? Even with video games now, there's no more wait till the weekend, we'll go to the store and buy you a game. Video game systems now have hard drives on them, and you download the game straight from the internet onto the hard drive. So there's no more waiting to go to the store on the weekend to get the game, just download it right away. So this instant gratification kids are growing up in, it's hard for them to sit in the car with mom and dad and put the phone away and have a conversation? Your son or daughter is in line at the grocery store with you. Are they gonna think to help you, or are they gonna be on their phone the whole time sitting next to you? Right? They need that constant gratification, constant doom scrolling of checking out their phone instead of being present in the outside world. Right? So this world of instant gratification has created a problem with long-term goals, because that involves a delay. They don't want a delay, they want instant. And the idea of failing first. So what these kids hate more than anything is anything that has a learning curve. So when they try something new, they need to be good at it the first time they try it, period. I'm not joining the soccer team because I'm not going to be good at it and everyone's going to see that I suck at it. I'm not doing this because I'm not going to be good at it the first time. So if they're not good at it the first time they try it, they're not doing it. The whole idea of a learning curve. Starting to see some faces where you're applying this to people. I like it. Everything's clicking, the gears are turning. And another thing to think about is the concept of boredom. Right? We're basically at the point now where we have to teach kids to be okay with being bored. How often are kids bored nowadays? And think about what you all did when you were a kid, when you were bored. What'd you do? Played, went outside, talked to yourself, used your imagination, visualized things. You focused on the self. You thought about things. You used your imagination, right? But now everything is focused on what did this person post? What did this person say? What's going on here? What new videos of Minecraft just uploaded? Right? So the idea of being bored and having a learning curve is really hard for these kids. So we were seeing much more of this fixed mindset as opposed to the growth mindset. And this is all the work of Dr. Carol Dweck in her great book, Mindset. I'm sure many of you have heard of. So definitely check out her book. So basically, all of instant gratification, when people get caught up in instant gratification and the brain gets wired towards instant gratification, it causes you to fear challenge. I don't want to challenge myself. I want to feel instant gratification. I want to feel good all the time. If you fear challenge, you devalue effort. Why do we devalue effort? Because effort has the power to reduce you. If I put effort into something, if I truly try, and I'm not the best, and I'm not good, effort and challenge can unmask my flaws. And everyone's going to see I'm not so good at this. And I'm going to feel bad about myself. And I'm going to retreat into my anxiety and my depression and those things. Right? So effort and challenge are a threat. They threaten to unmask your flaws. And it teaches kids to not try. Exert as little effort as possible, and this becomes a way to emotionally manipulate and establish dominance from adults. I'm going to exert as little effort as possible. I'm not going to try something that's new. I'm not going to try something that's challenging. I'm not even going to start. I'm not even going to put in any effort, because the effort and the challenge can unmask my flaws, so I'm not even going to bother. I can't deal with a learning curve because it's going to unmask my flaws. It's a threat. Does that all make sense? You guys all see this kind of stuff yet?
What was the author's name?
Dr. Carol Dweck. The book is called Mindset. I believe she's out of Stanford University. Her work's amazing. So she coined the phrase growth mindset, fixed mindset. Those are her phrases. It's an incredible book. So she runs through all of this. Okay. All right. So now we're moving on to the parent side of things. And you guys can let me know what you see here. What we see here, because we see a lot of this in Philadelphia. So along with the rise of instant gratification in this instant gratification world we live in, we've also seen a rise of the permissive parenting style of parenting. So permissive parenting can lead to insecurity, avoidance of tasks, lack of self-regulation, lack of resiliency, and poor social skills, and lead to that fixed mindset. So what is permissive parenting? It's when there's very low demands on the child, very little demands in the home, unstructured environment, and high responsiveness to their needs. If they need help, If anything they need, parents are right there to help them. Very few guidelines and rules, open access to screens and games, little to no balance between non-preferred and preferred tasks. So the kids are always choosing their own task, which is the preferred tasks. So that means video games all day long and no homework. No consequences, low expectations, and not allowing their child to struggle or take accountability. Do you guys see this here? Yes? You do? There you go.
Okay, I'm not exactly sure how to phrase this question, so I apologize if I stumble a bit, but this scares me a little bit in the sense, right, that this becomes a nature versus nurture question. And people are going to see these behaviors in students that are exhibiting executive function dysregulation, and they're going to think, you just have a bad parent.
Correct.
So where is the balance there between our cultural norms are changing, and in a sense, as a society now, we are reducing the ability of our children in general, the entire population, to develop these executive functioning skills versus people who have a hardwired, for lack of a better word, difference in their brain, which you kind of showed the brain scan at the beginning.
You got it, you got it.
They have actually a developmental delay, even when compared to their peers who might also be behind. They are now an additional, 3 or 4 or 5 years.
Excellent, excellent question. Beautiful question. So it's super important to understand when it comes to ADHD and this true brain difference, this neurodiverse population, the vast majority of the time, over 90% of the time, ADHD is hereditary. ADHD is not a result of parenting. You are not going to get ADHD from screens, period. End of story, no discussion. You are not going to get ADHD from your parenting style. There's brain injuries, there's trauma, there's those sorts of things, but the vast majority of the time, ADHD is carried over from the parent. It is hereditary. These issues right here I'm talking about, the instant gratification world, the change in parenting styles, these are leading to a lack of interpersonal relationships and meaningful experiences which strengthen executive functioning skills. So the true brain differences, the true ADHD, that is a hereditary component. It is about the brain, it is a brain difference. But we have to start to do more parent coaching, which is part of what the American Academy of Pediatrics is talking about, and this is what we have to do. Helping them to create structure in the home. Parents need help. Parents don't know how to start when it comes to creating screen time guidelines, when it comes to creating structure in the home, and getting kids to sign up for after-school activities, and getting out and doing new things. They don't know how to deal with behaviors. So this is not parent blaming. This is really, a widespread thing that, gets pushed by the media, gets pushed by, going outside is dangerous. There's dangers out there. There's things out there that are not good for the kids. It's not safe out there, right? And all the big corporations, Microsoft, Sony, Nintendo, Apple, Facebook, Snapchat, TikTok, they want your kids on the phones as much as possible. They're creating algorithms to keep the kids addicted as much as possible, period. So this is the last thing you want to do is start to blame parents. But this is a huge, huge issue of what this world is becoming, and we need to start to focus on relationships and experiences. Does that all make sense? Cool. So we look here at the 4 different parenting styles, and this is all part of the parent coaching that is so important with ADHD, and we look at permissive. So permissive parenting is child-driven, rarely gives or enforces rules, and overindulges the child to avoid conflict. So you're the boss, indulgent, accepting, lenient, low expectations. And this permissive parenting style leads to insecurity and the fixed mindset. Got some crickets from my... I'll be a little bit more entertaining, I swear. About half hour left. Okay. And then we have neglectful, which of course is criminal. And we have authoritarian, which sounds way too much like authoritative. Authoritarian is also incredibly unhelpful and leads to trauma. But there's authoritative parenting, which has a terrible name to describe it, but it's really democratic. So authoritative parenting solves problems together with the child, sets clear rules and expectations, open communication and natural consequences. And you look at some of the words from authoritative, let's talk about it. Responsive, reciprocal, high expectations, democratic, assertive, flexible. So authoritative parenting is true 50-50 democratic parenting, where everything is open, discussed, there's structure, parents feedback support over time, kids learn to clean their own room, they learn to pack their own lunches, they're responsible for their own responsibilities, it's not overindulging the child, and this is all part of parent coaching. Let's coach them up on the benefits of authoritative parenting and how permissive can set them back. So decades of research show that authoritative parenting is the most effective style for raising productive, well-adjusted, functional children with ADHD, but I refer to this as reciprocal parenting. So I don't refer to it as authoritative parenting, I call it reciprocal parenting, 50-50, right? It's not so much teaching the kid to take, and never give. It's 50-50 between parent and child to give and take. So it's all about having the structure, expectations, chores, giving the kids competent roles. If you give the child a competent role in the home, in the beginning, yeah, they might not like it, but over time they build competence, they build confidence, and they build a positive self-image. Limits on screen time, physical activity, and family time. Super important to raising well-adjusted kids that have a positive self-worth and a positive self-image. Okay? Any questions on that so far? Yes?
Let me preface it with this. So I guess, like we talked about nature and nurture, it's not to blame the parent, but there's definitely, we'll say, advantages and disadvantages to different parenting styles for students with ADHD.
Yep.
On the nurture side of things, so just like enough nurturing can't change the size of the brain and create a better functioning amygdala to regulate this. Is there consideration for symptoms of permissive parenting style that we're seeing as problematic without it genuinely being like ADHD? So I guess, for example, if I don't have strict rules, I've never had to follow them, I don't have to practice things I don't want to do often, I don't have to stay seated if I don't want to.
Yeah.
And that's not good.
Yeah.
So is there consideration or guidelines or best practice to rule out that this is a nurture symptom and not a nature symptom?
That really all comes down to how deep the evaluation is for that student. You know, how deep the neuropsych testing is, like how deep of the diagnostics can we do on that individual in terms of how deep is the case history, how deep is the parent interview, is there an observation in the home, is there an observation at school? Because you're absolutely right, permissive parenting can lead to non-compliance and behaviors towards adults, a lack of respect, a lack of follow-through, and it can create issues. Is it going to create a brain difference? No, but it can create a lack of true independence. So because the parent is overindulging and there's low expectations, as the student goes into middle school, goes into high school and beyond, they don't know how to have competent roles, 50-50 roles with others. Chances are that's going to be someone who struggles socially, who struggles at school, who has difficulty maintaining a job, if at all, when they were a teenager. So it's going to be hard for them to have those three things that were the true predictors of success. It's going to be hard for them to have those things if there's little structure in the home.
So I guess it might not be your professional place to know or say, are there things in place that say as part of our testing we look at X, Y, Z to evaluate the nurture side and not?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Students
So you know, the nature of the beast is these neuropsych tests are what, $5,000, $6,000 private pay for families. It's a ridiculous system, of course, but you know, you'll find some, and also these neuropsych tests tend to be done on the people who know the kids the least. So it's not the teachers doing them, it's someone who knows the kids for 3 hours in their own office. There's good neuropsych testing where they interview the teachers, they interview the parents, they do multiple observations. It's done over the period of maybe 1, 2, 3 months. And then there's not so good neuropsych testing where the kid comes into the office, does testing, and that's it. And then it's going to be a couple of, put this in the IEP, put this in the 504, and that's it. There has to be a whole list there of parent coaching, of things the parents need to do. So if you get a neuropsych test back and it's nothing, it's only for the school has to do this in the IEP, the school has to do this in the 504, but nothing for the parents, then they probably didn't dig very deep. You know what I mean? So you have to, so it's very important for the individual doing the evaluation to look at all different environments. So you can have kids that show their symptoms at school and not in the home. They can have issues at home, but not in school. They can respond to the structure of school, but really break down at the unstructure at home. And, it could be the relationship with parents. But you have to see the kid in the varying environments. You have to do the interviews and dig deeper than just, oh, he got this on the Wyatt. He got this on this. It's not all standardized test scores. Standardized test scores, all of these tests are biased. All of these tests have issues. All of these standardized tests, I'm not a fan of any of them. I'm a fan of interviewing. It's money. It's all money. Thank you. It's all money. When you look at these tests, when you actually look at these tests on how much they are to purchase, they're $600, $700, $800. It's ridiculous. And they're constantly updated every 2 years. And they say, oh, you can't use the old ones anymore. You gotta buy the new ones. It's a ridiculous system. And we always have to, and it's all based in, oh, you can't get special ed services unless you're 2 standard deviations below the mean. It's insane. But we have to start to look at what we're seeing informally in the natural environment. So many of these kids do well on these tests, but they break down in the natural environment. It's a performance disorder. Okay? Anything else? Yep.
I don't think you see it as much now. We have seen it in the past where conversations with teachers where we are afraid to talk to the parent about certain issues because the parent's going to go home and just yell at the child and think that corrects.
Correct.
What happens to the child under those circumstances? How do you help the parent understand?
Well, that has to be part of the parent coaching, is that yelling does not help. And one of the biggest issues you see with parents is they try to talk to the child and they yell back at the child when the child is dysregulated. So parents need to learn how to use a reset and save these conversations for kids when they're back at baseline. So it's important to coach parents that language makes dysregulation worse. So when a kid is already dysregulated, if you talk at them and throw information at them and try to coach them out of that dysregulation, you're going to blow them up because you're feeding into that attention, you're feeding into it. Kids want the back and forth. Kids would rather be in a 3-hour argument with their mom and feel that power struggle than do 5 minutes of homework. That's exactly it. They would rather do that. So you don't want to feed into that. So that's part of the parent coaching, is wait till they're back at baseline, have an open conversation with them, set expectations, and build these skills where they're able to do these things without getting dysregulated first, right? So it's in-depth parent coaching. So yeah, you want to educate the parents, but you also want to teach them how to respond to all the tools in the kid's toolbox, So now we're going to get into the real meat portion of the presentation here. So we talked earlier about all the 4 pillars of executive functions: self-regulation, self-awareness, self-motivation, self-evaluation, and all of those 4 pillars are founded upon self-language and what I refer to as internal language. So internal language is the foundation of executive functions. And this is really fascinating stuff. This is my favorite stuff to present on. And I think once you guys learn about what internal language is, it'll start to really get your gears going and change your mindset on these kids with ADHD and why they struggle so much with these external symptoms. Everyone staying awake? A long day? Okay, so really what happened here is this is the Dr. Russell Barkley, Dr. Lev Vygotsky model. So Dr. Russell Barkley took the research done by Dr. Lev Vygotsky and he compared his work on language to executive function. So it's the Barkley-Vygotsky model I'm about to discuss. So Dr. Lev Vygotsky, pictured here, is the one who discovered that over time, language goes from public to private. Okay? So remember that motion there, right? I'm going to be doing that a lot. So between the ages of 0 to 3, Vygotsky found that kids will emit language to others. All language is expressive, and there's no self-talk yet. So between the ages of 0 to 3, all language is expressive and outward and directed at others. And I see this with my daughter now. Dog, cat, bird, tree, car, bus. She's just constantly describing the world around her and emitting language to others and pointing things out. But there is no self-directed talk yet. There is no language yet brought back to the self to change oneself. It's all expressive language. And then between the ages of 3 to 5, kids will begin to talk to themselves. But it's between these ages when this self-directed talk is still external. It can be measured, it can be heard. Kids will start to direct language to themselves, but it's not yet internal. It's not yet private. They will talk to themselves. You put a 5-year-old to bed at night, and you put your ear to the door, you hear them talking, and there's nobody there. Who are they talking to? Right? They're talking to themselves, they're entertaining themselves, they're using language, not directed towards others, directed towards themselves, but you can hear it. It can be measured. Right? But it's right here between the ages of 5 and 7 when the magic happens. This is when the face and the larynx start to become suppressed, and language goes from public to private. So between the ages of 5 to 7, kids develop an internal voice, an ability to have an internal dialogue with their brain that is private and internalized and is directed towards themselves. A behavior towards the self to change oneself. And between the ages of 9 to 12 is when they develop this full use of internalized private language. Okay? So language goes from public to private. Yep?
We missed 8. What happens at year 8?
Year 8.
Yeah, 7 and then 12, 9.
Oh. That's,
Where would you put that there? That's where all the magic happens, right?
I like this group. Well done, well done. So, let's call that right in the middle there. All right? So 8, you know, so it's basically between 5 and 7 is when the face and the larynx become suppressed, and over time they're developing more of an internal voice. And then it's not really until between 9 and 12 when it's full. So they're still going to be talking to themselves out loud a little bit between 5 and 11 and a half. But then once they're 12 years old, that internal voice is fully internal and it can no longer be measured. Right? So 8 is really at that point where they're still talking to themselves out loud, but they're gaining an internal voice. Good?
Yeah.
Sweet.
Thank you.
Of course. Right on top of it. Okay. So language goes from public to private. It goes from description to self-instruction. So kids start by describing the world around them. Everything's external. Like my 20-month-old daughter. Tree, car, bus. Just describing everything. I see a door, I see a cat, I see a friend, I see a slide, I see a swing. And they're just constantly describing the world around them. And then eventually we start to use our language for self-instruction. And this is the beginning of executive functioning. So below 5 years of age, language has not yet gained control over the motor system of the brain. But then between 5 and 7 years old, there's been enough diverse experiences, enough relationship development, hopefully, and enough development of the brain to allow the brain to strengthen, and language gains control over the motor strip of the brain. And here's my favorite quote from Dr. Russell Barkley: "What you say starts to control what you do." So we are able to use language to govern our behavior. And this is super important, because language becomes a foundation for self-regulation. So this whole process of stop and think, it's really stop and talk to yourself. Stop and have an internal dialogue. And this is what's missing in ADHD, is that internal voice. and the inability to use that internal voice. And we're going to dive deeper into that. Okay? So here's a really interesting task. So you can engage in self-talk. You can engage in conversation with yourself. You can recite the words to your favorite song in your head and try to talk to someone else at the exact same time. Go ahead and try to do it right now. Try to talk to the person next to you and talk to yourself right now. Can you do it? Does it work? Continue Taylor Swift, it's fine. So really, couldn't do it, could you? So all verbal thinking is speech to the self with the face and the larynx suppressed. So right now, the same parts of the brain I'm using to talk to you all externally are the same parts of the brain I use to talk to myself. It's the same system. It's the exact same system. And what's even more fascinating is there's been research studies done where they've placed little electrodes all over someone's face, all over their larynx, all over, and they've asked them to engage in silent, internal, privatized speech. And those little electrodes pick up those movements as if they were saying those words out loud. It's the same system, it's the same thing. It just can't be seen with the naked eye, but the things are moving. It's the same thing with visual imagery and sports performance. And Dr. Russell Barkley talks about this in his lectures, where if you put electrodes all over your arms and ask someone to visualize throwing a ball across the room, but not actually doing it, those electrodes will pick up those movements as if they did throw the ball. That's the power of the internal language, right? It's the same cognitive system. So this system that we're working on to develop language and grow vocabulary and grow reading and grow writing and grow internal cognitive thought, it's the same thing as our external system. This is the ADHD and executive function and language connection. So as language acquisition increases, we see an increase in executive function acquisition. Okay? So visual imagery and self-talk. So we're talking about visual imagery, which we'll dive deeper into, which is the foundational executive function skill. And we're talking about self-talk, right? Got 3:18, so let's speed through this. So very quickly now, does anyone want to volunteer? Someone, very quickly, be quick and easy, 30 seconds. Come on up. All right, so I'm going to ask you very quickly to describe what are your plans for after this presentation is done? What are your plans for the rest of the day? What are you going to do for the rest of the day?
I'm going to go home, cook dinner, do the rest of my homework, and start on a review assignment for college.
Is that it?
That's it.
All right, thank you. All right, that was quick. Obviously very quick and brief. We only had one participant there. But typically what happens there is you dive a little bit into more detail and people end up doing something quite fascinating. So as people are describing the future and what's to come up, they tend to use lots of gestures. So they'll use gestures, like for example, after this is done, I'll sit in my car, I'll turn my car on, I'll go home, I'll open my laptop. He did a little bit there with his hands there, but not enough gesturing, maybe next time, okay? But the gesturing is showing that we have visual imagery and self-talk working together in harmony. And this is super, super important with executive functions. So because gesturing involves planning and emotion. Planning plus emotion sticks longer into our working memory. So when we're gesturing through things, we're adding emotion, we're adding the future feeling into our gestures. So you think about our kids with ADHD and executive functions, they don't gesture when they tell stories. They don't gesture when they talk about their futures. They sit there, their hands are still, they're not moving. When we're gesturing, when we're miming through things, that's using our future thinking. We're visualizing the future. We're talking through the future. So teaching our kids to gesture through things is a key facet to executive functions. So, language and executive functions. Language goes from public to private. Same with executive functions, reliance on others, to the self. Adult help towards independence. Actions to others, turn back to the self. So the steps of executive functions. Number one, we have to be able to stop the self. Inhibit, stop the self. Stop responding to the external stimuli, stop responding to the external world, and focus on the self. So we stop the self from what we would have done on impulse. And then number two, here it is. The very first executive function skill, the foundation of all executive functions, is nonverbal working memory. So this is an absolutely massive thing to take away from this presentation, is the importance of nonverbal working memory. So nonverbal working memory truly is our imagination. It is our visual imagery system of the brain. It's the movie theater of the brain, the DVD player of the brain. It allows us to re-image the relevant past and learn from past experiences. And it also allows us to forecast ourselves into the future so we can plan, prioritize, and problem solve. This is super important, and this is what's missing in kids with executive functioning delays. And humans have such a strong visual imagery system, stronger than any other living species. We are able to derive all of the senses from the images that we create. You can think of a dinner that you had last week, and you can visualize that dinner in that restaurant, and you can retaste the food. You can rehear the sounds of the restaurant. You can re-feel the texture of the napkin. You can bring back all of the senses because of how strong our visual imagery system is. Everything starts with that image. And when we have the ability to stop and visualize, yep.
Does the steps of internal language and the growth of the executive functioning correlate with the developmental step of a child having an invisible friend? It's a lot of big words to end with invisible friend. Sounds a little funny.
There's a lot of studies that show that kids do have invisible friends, go on to great success in school and other things like that.
So
And
the language is like, it's
Yeah.
not still being put out. I
Yeah.
feel like 5 is when you're going to start to see those kids having that. So I didn't know if it was like developmentally connected.
Yeah, having an invisible friend is quite typical for young kids. So it's definitely something that is a good milestone. I don't know for sure if that's actually been studied quite often, but yeah, that's part of your visual imagery system, your ability to create mental movies. So obviously, I'm not going to say nonverbal working memory with my students. I use the phrase mental movies. So the ability to create mental movies, visualize what's to come. A kid comes into speech class, a kid comes into science class, math class, whatever. Before you start anything, ask them to put their head down for a minute and visualize, okay, what do you think we're going to do today? Get them more actively engaged in what's happening instead of just sitting there and following along like a zombie, right? Let's have them sit and visualize what this class may look like, how they may feel, what's to come, record some of their predictions, and then go over it at the end of class. What came true, what didn't? What went well, what didn't go well? What went better than expected, what went worse? We have to start to teach these kids to stop and visualize. All executive functioning starts with nonverbal working memory, period. So if you're downstairs with your child and you say, go upstairs and clean your room, if they're not visualizing what that room looks like when it's clean before they get up there, if they don't have the mental image, the mental movie of that room already being clean in their brain, what's going to happen? They're going to walk in their room and get distracted by the first shiny object, and nothing's going to get done. It has to start with a picture. It has to start with an image of a mental movie of what it looks like when it's done. So it is so important that all of you individuals who work with students start to remember mental movies and the nonverbal working memory system. Okay, now verbal working memory. We talked a lot about this. So we start with mental movies, and then we go into self-talk. So all executive functions can be defined as an action to the self. Non-verbal working memory, you sense to yourself, you see to yourself. Verbal working memory, you talk to yourself. Okay? So this is the internal privatized speech, what I refer to as the brain coach. So you do mental movies and the brain coach. You teach kids to visualize to themselves, re-image the past, forecast into the future, and you teach them to coach themselves. You teach them to coach themselves based on what they see. And it all happens when language captures the motor system. Just want to speed through this part quickly. Okay, so after we do that, so we have internal visualizations, internal talk. Over time, we then learn to internalize our emotions and our motivation. So younger kids are reliant on the outside world to determine how they feel and what motivates them. Young kids need the candy, the sticker charts, the external rewards. And over time, kids learn to internally motivate themselves. Emotions are determined on how other people treat us, and we have our quick emotions. And over time, we're able to decide our own emotions and how to best respond to things. So we go from external to internal to the self. We create our own emotions to respond more appropriately, emote to the self, motivate to self. And we talked a little bit before about earlier kids, kindergarten and preschool. What is by far the most important thing for young kids to do in preschool and kindergarten? Why is that? Why play?
Social interaction.
What? What? Come on, whispering. It's cool. So we internalize play. So the reason, play is another one of this hand motion. So young kids do manual play, trucks, cars, dinosaurs, dress up, blocks, all that stuff. Manual play becomes internal play. Internalized play. So all of that manual play moves to symbolic and mental play. And what's mental play? Mental play is executive functioning. All of that play for kids, manual play, goes to internal planning, problem solving, and creativity. These three things are mental play. Planning, problem solving, creativity. It goes from external to internal. So all this disappearance of play in kindergarten and preschool, where kids are now sitting at desks and doing worksheets in preschool, is leading to difficulty with executive functions later on. And all of these schools that cut recess time and eliminated recess time ended up seeing problems later on, because there was a lack of manual play to build mental play. Creating multiple different scenarios to solve a problem. That's mental play. Executive functioning is mental play. We have to allow kids to play. And this is what places like Finland get so right, because they allow for project-based learning, community-based learning. Play all the way up until 12th grade. Play doesn't have to be toys and sandboxes and those sorts of things. It can be project-based learning and going out in the community. So play is super important. So this right here is the true list of executive functions. So depending on who you read, like I said earlier, you're going to get a different list. This is the true list. So number one, we start to develop some self-awareness. Kids are able to perceive their environment, perceive themselves in social environments. They learn to inhibit their impulses and self-restraint. Then comes the non-verbal working memory. So first we stop self, then we visualize the self, we re-image the past, we forecast into the future, and then we talk to ourselves, we emote to ourselves, self-motivation, we build our own motivation, and then mental play, planning and problem solving. And that's the highest form of executive functions, the ability to independently plan and problem solve. So this right here, when we focus on the internal executive function skills, this is so important. Moving away from external organization, external time management. We teach kids to become future thinkers. We teach kids to visualize and talk to their brains, because that's what's missing. So we look here. This is the true ADHD brain. So ADHD is a disorder of working memory. And working memory is different than short-term memory, long-term memory. It's the information you use and perform with. So the true weaknesses with ADHD are mental movies and self-talk, visual imagery and self-talk. And these two skills need to be able to work together in harmony. But in the ADHD brain, they are weakened and disconnected. And that creates a myriad of problems, big problems. And one of the biggest issues there is, let me find that. So, I know we have a little bit, okay, so right here, so it's disconnected. So really what those two skills do, nonverbal working memory, visual imagery, and then self-stated implementation intentions with verbal working memory. This is what creates if, then, cause, and effect thinking. So when we have our visual imagery and self-talk working together in harmony, we understand cause and effect because we are not stuck in the present moment. We're not time blind like ADHD kids. We're remembering from our past mistakes, we're repairing those mistakes, and we're planning to the future. We are future-oriented individuals. We understand cause and effect. So one of the best ways to think about this, between visual imagery and self-talk, is we're getting kids to understand, okay, if the future is going to look like that visual imagery, then this is what I need to do now, self-talk. So this is executive functions, conditional thinking, teaching kids to understand now and not now. Okay? If the future is going to look like that, nonverbal visual imagery, then this is what I need to do now, self-talk. So this is what we're developing in our kids. The ability to see what the future looks like so they know what to do now. Okay. Only went over about 2 minutes, that's pretty good. I think that's probably good. I'll put my information here. Okay. See it? Good. So here's my email, mike@grownoutTherapy.com. My website is grownoutadhd.com. There we go. That work?
Yep.
Sweet. YouTube and Instagram, grownoutadhd on Instagram. So when I do these presentations, I've been a part of many different schools and professional development. I know what it's like to go through a long day of PD and then someone trains you and the next day it's hard to implement any of the things you learned, right? And you lose contact with the person who did the training, and that's it. Everything's back to square one as if you never did the training to begin with, right? So I love to keep in touch with the people that bring me out. So please send me emails, message me on Instagram. The more I can answer questions about the direct students you work with, provide more helpful strategies and things you can implement right away. Yep.
I just had a quick question about that. Is there one of these places maybe on your website that we could go and get practical advice for what to literally do with kids?
Yeah, you can email me. You can email me, yeah. Yes, that's my email, this is my cell phone number. So please, reach out to me. You know, I love to keep in touch with the people I do presentations for. This is exactly what I do. I travel the country, travel the world doing these presentations. You guys have a fantastic school year, a fantastic program. Incredibly impressed by, you know, everybody here, really dedicated teachers who understand the kids and their overall well-being. So you guys are a part of something really great and strong here. So please, whatever I can do to further your learning and take what you learned today into practical, easy-to-use strategies, email me, call me, follow me on Instagram, send me a message, and let's keep in touch.